Hey guys, tonight we're going back in time. Far back to a world where surviving the winter wasn't about adjusting the thermostat or grabbing a heated blanket. Imagine yourself in the middle of medieval Europe where the winters were biting. The nights stretched on forever, and your survival depended entirely on your resourcefulness. The cold was relentless, seeping through walls, clothing, and even into your bones. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's a winter evening in a small medieval village. Snow blankets the fields, turning the once busy farmland into an expanse of icy silence. The air is sharp, your breath puffing out in visible clouds as you trudge through the frost. There's no central heating, no thick glass windows to keep the chill at bay. The sun has long since dipped below the horizon, and the only light comes from flickering torches and the faint glow of a fire in the distance. Winter in medieval Europe wasn't just inconvenient, it was life-threatening. The season dictated every aspect of a peasant's existence, forcing them to plan and prepare during the milder months. Without enough food, firewood, or warm clothing, a family could succumb to hunger or hypothermia before spring's arrival. The coldest nights were the most dangerous. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in buckets, and livestock had to be brought indoors to prevent them from freezing to death. Walls of wattle and daub, a framework of woven sticks, covered with a mixture of clay, mud, and straw, offered little insulation. Wind whistled through the smallest cracks and snow piled up against the door. But despite these challenges, medieval peasants were remarkably resourceful. They had no choice. Their survival depended on their ability to work with the limited resources available. Think of them as the original DIY experts. That fire in the hearth wasn't just for comfort, it was the beating heart of the home. Its warmth, however faint, made the difference between life and death. And speaking of the hearth, let's talk about how peasants managed to keep those fires going through the night. Forget about matches or lighters. Starting a fire was an ordeal in itself, often requiring flint steel and a steady hand. Once a fire was lit, you did everything possible to keep it alive. Banks of glowing embers were carefully covered with ashes before bed, preserving their heat until morning. Even so, the cold seeped in. Sleeping arrangements were all about conserving warmth. Entire families crammed together under heavy woolen blankets, often sharing their space with sheep-goats or even a cow. Yes, you might have to snuggle up next to a bleeding companion to make it through the night. The cold didn't just threaten the body, it tested the spirit. Imagine hearing the howling of wolves in the distance, or the groaning of timber as the weight of snow pressed down on the roof. Every creak and shadow could set your heart racing. And yet, in the face of these dangers, medieval peasants found ways to persevere. One of the greatest tools at their disposal was their sense of community. Neighbors shared resources, whether it was firewood, food, or a helping hand to repair a broken roof. Entire villages worked together to ensure that no one was left to face the winter alone. And then there was faith. Religion played a central role in medieval life, providing comfort and hope during the darkest months. Churches became gathering places where prayers were said for a mild winter and bountiful harvests in the year to come. People also turned to old superstitions like hanging bundles of herbs to ward off evil spirits or scattering salt to protect their homes. As you settle into your cozy spot tonight, consider how far we've come. Modern comforts like insulated walls, heated blankets, and hot cocoa would have seemed like magic to a medieval peasant. But perhaps there's something to learn from their resilience, their ingenuity, and their ability to find warmth, not just in fire, but in each other. The sun has barely risen, and the world outside your small medieval home is frozen in a still, icy silence. You're already awake because dawn marks the start of another relentless day of survival. The fire you carefully banked last night still smolders faintly, its warmth a small victory against the cold that creeps through every crack and crevice. In these freezing conditions, the daily routine begins with the most critical task tending to the fire. You crouch by the hearth, your hands trembling as you carefully uncover the ashes to reveal the glowing embers beneath. With a bundle of dried kindling sticks gathered and dried during the warmer months, you coax the embers back to life. A soft glow builds into a flickering flame, and for a moment there's a sense of triumph. Without this fire, there's no cooking, no warmth, and no way to survive the icy grip of winter. Once the fire is stable, attention turns to breakfast, or more accurately, whatever scraps are left from the previous day. Winter diets were bleak for medieval peasants. The preserved foods from the harvest, salted meats, hard cheeses, and root vegetables formed the bulk of the meals. This morning, it's likely a thin porridge made from barley or oats, simmered over the fire and flavored with a pinch of salt. There's no sugar, no coffee, no lavish spreads. Still, the hot meal warms your belly and gives you the energy to face the day. Outside, the village is coming to life. You hear the crunch of boots on snow as neighbors emerge from their homes bundled in layers of wool and fur. Their clothing is simple but practical tunics, cloaks and leggings dyed in earthy tones like russet, indigo, and saffron. The wealthier families might wear fur-lined cloaks, but for most, survival means patching and layering whatever fabrics they can find. Your next task is to check on the livestock, a critical part of every peasant's survival strategy. Animals like cows, sheep, and chickens are housed in or near the home during winter, sharing their warmth with the family. You step into the dim, smoky barn attached to your house, where the air smells of hay and animals. The cows huff clouds of breath into the chilly air, their dark eyes watching as you scatter hay into their troughs. The chickens nestled in their corner need fresh water, but the bucket outside has frozen solid overnight. You carry it to the fire, chipping away at the ice until it melts enough for the birds to drink. These small chores, repeated day after day, form the rhythm of winter life. But surviving winter isn't just about meeting physical needs. The psychological toll of these long, dark months is immense. The days are short, the nights endless, and the world outside often feels hostile. To keep spirits up, families tell stories by the fire, weaving tales of bravery, magic, and faith. These stories passed down through generations are more than entertainment. They're a reminder that even in the coldest, darkest moments, there's hope. Historians still argue whether these stories were purely for moral instruction or if they served a deeper communal purpose. Regardless, they were essential in creating a sense of connection and resilience. Imagine sitting by the fire, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls as a parent recounts a tale of knights and dragons. For a moment, the cold and hunger fade into the background, replaced by the warmth of shared imagination. The community also plays a crucial role. Winter brings people together out of necessity. You might gather with neighbors to repair a broken roof, exchange food, or simply share news. In these moments, the village becomes more than a collection of individuals, it's a lifeline. One quirky tradition during the coldest months was wassailing. This practice involved villagers going from house to house singing songs and sharing a spiced cider-like drink to ensure a good harvest in the coming year. It's part celebration, part superstition, and entirely about maintaining morale during the bleakest season. And then there's religion. The church offers both spiritual and practical support during winter. You can almost hear the church bell ringing in the distance, calling the village to morning mass. Inside the cold stone walls of the church, candles flicker their light reflected on gilded icons. Prayers are said for the survival of the village, for the health of the animals, and for the return of warmer days. By mid-morning, the chores are done and the village settles into a strange stillness. There's no farmland to tend, no crops to harvest. Instead, people focus on maintenance, repairing tools, mending clothing, and preparing for the next season. You sit by the fire, a needle and thread in hand, patching a tear in your tunic. The wool is coarse and your fingers ache from the cold, but every stitch is a step toward survival. As the day wears on, the sun barely rises above the horizon before it begins to set again. The shadows lengthen and the cold deepens. You pile more wood onto the fire, grateful for the foresight to gather enough during the autumn. Wood was precious. Every log burned represents hours of labor spent chopping, hauling, and stacking. Dinner is another simple affair, perhaps a stew made from dried beans, turnips, and a scrap of meat for flavor. The firelight dances on the walls as you eat, casting a golden glow that feels almost comforting. Outside, the wind picks up, howling through the trees and rattling the shutters. Before bed, you once again tend to the fire, carefully banking the embers to keep them alive through the night. As you crawl under the heavy blankets, you huddle close to your family, sharing body heat in the dark, cold room. The air is still the only sound, the faint crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of your breathing. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same struggles. But for now, you rest. In this moment, you've survived another day, and that's no small victory. The night is quiet, but the cold is relentless. You wake intermittently, feeling the icy air seeping through the cracks in the wooden walls of your home. It's the sort of cold that makes your breath visible even indoors, a stark reminder of the constant battle against winter. There's no way to truly heat the entire house, only the hearth provides warmth, and even its reach is limited. You pull your blanket tighter, its coarse wool scratching against your skin, and think about the day ahead. Winter mornings are unforgiving, and every task demands preparation. One of the most pressing concerns is water. The nearby stream, your primary water source, has likely frozen overnight. Gathering water is a daily ordeal, one that underscores just how tenuous life can feel. At first light, you bundle up in layers of tunics and woolen cloaks, wrapping your hands in makeshift mittens. The trek to the stream is a solitary one, your boots crunching through the snow as your breath puffs into the frosty air. The stream lies beneath a layer of ice, thick and unyielding. You kneel down, gripping the handle of an iron pick, and begin to chip away at the surface. The ice cracks loudly, echoing through the still forest, and soon you've carved out a hole large enough to lower your wooden bucket. The water below is icy and clear, and as you pull the bucket back up, droplets freeze on the rim almost instantly. The weight of the water is significant, but you know it's essential. Without it, there's no drinking, no cooking, no survival. Back at home, the water is carefully rationed. Every drop is precious and waste is unthinkable. You set a pot over the fire to warm some of it, watching as the frost slowly melts away from the iron rim. Warm water is a luxury, one that soothes your chilled hands and offers a fleeting sense of comfort. Today's tasks include one of the more dangerous winter chores, checking the roof. Snow piles up quickly and the weight can cause the wooden beams to sag or even collapse. Armed with a wooden rake, you climb onto the roof, your footing precarious on the icy shingles. The wind bites at your face as you carefully scrape the snow away, working methodically to ensure the structure remains sound. It's not just snow that poses a threat. Ice dams, those thick ridges of frozen water that form at the edge of the roof, can lead to leaks and damage if left unchecked. Breaking them off is a delicate process, as too much force could damage the roof itself. You swing a small mallet gently against the ice, watching it crack and tumble to the ground below. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants fully understood the engineering principles behind their homes. But one thing is clear: survival required constant vigilance. Every aspect of the house, from its thatched roof to its wattle and daub walls, needed regular upkeep. Neglecting even a minor repair could mean disaster when the elements were at their most unforgiving. As the sun reaches its peak, though it remains low in the sky, your focus shifts to food storage. The pantry is a small, dark space, its shelves lined with clay jars and wooden bins. Inside are the fruits of months of hard labor, salted meat, dried beans, and bundles of herbs. You also see the turnips, carrots, and onions stored in straw to keep them from freezing. One quirky preservation method involves suspending certain foods from the ceiling to keep them out of reach of pests. Strings of garlic and dried herbs hang like decorations, adding a faint, earthy scent to the air. You take inventory, carefully calculating how long your supplies might last if the winter drags on longer than expected. The absence of fresh food is keenly felt during these months. You miss the vibrant greens of spring and the sweet fruits of summer. Occasionally you dream of biting into an apple or tasting the rich flavor of a roasted pheasant. But winter is a season of necessity, not indulgence, and every meal is a reminder of the effort it took to secure it. One meal stands out during this season: pottage. It's a thick, hearty stew made from whatever ingredients are available. Today you chop a turnip, some dried leeks, and a handful of beans, tossing them into a pot of water over the fire. A scrap of salt pork adds a touch of flavor, though it's mostly for the fat it provides. As the stew simmers, the smell fills the small home, mingling with the smoky aroma of the fire. It's not a feast, but it's filling, and for that you're grateful. Meals like these are shared with the family, everyone huddled close to the fire, their bowls cupped in cold hands. After lunch, there's time for a bit of mending. You sit near the hearth, your needle threading in and out of a piece of worn cloth. Winter is especially hard on clothing, and every tear or hole must be repaired to keep the cold at bay. Wool and linen are the materials of choice, durable yet simple, though they rarely feel warm enough on the coldest days. Outside, the sky begins to darken and the temperature drops sharply. You step out briefly to gather more firewood, your breath catching at the sight of the snow-covered landscape. The village looks peaceful under its white blanket, but you know better. This tranquility is deceptive. It masks the constant effort required to endure. As night falls, you close the shutters tightly against the wind and check the fire one last time. The flames dance and crackle, casting long shadows on the walls. You feel a moment of quiet satisfaction, another day survived. Lying in bed, you can hear the distant howl of wolves. They're a reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond the edge of the village. But here, under the heavy blankets, with the fire still glowing faintly, you feel a sense of safety. The cold may press against the walls, but it hasn't won. Not tonight. But you wake the next morning to a pale light filtering through the gaps in the wooden shutters. The cold is sharper today, biting at your face, even before you've left the warmth of your bed. The fire in the hearth has burned low, and you can feel the room's temperature drop sharply. It's time to rekindle it, a task you approach with practiced efficiency. Grabbing a handful of straw, you crouch by the hearth, blowing softly on the glowing embers. The spark catches, and soon the straw begins to smolder, producing thin tendrils of smoke. You carefully add small twigs and branches, building the flames until they're strong enough to take on the larger logs. Within minutes, the room begins to warm, though the heat never quite reaches the corners. Winter mornings are slow and deliberate. The rhythm of life revolves around survival, and every task feels like a small battle against the elements. Today, your focus is on your animals. The livestock is not just a source of food and labor, they're an integral part of the household's survival. Bundling up in your heaviest cloak, you step out into the frosty morning. The barn is just a short walk from the house, its wooden structure leaning slightly under the weight of snow. You push open the heavy door, greeted immediately by the earthy smell of hay and animals. The warmth inside is faint but comforting, a testament to the body heat of the creatures that call this place home. Your cow, a sturdy animal with thick fur, looks at you expectantly. She's your primary source of milk, a resource that feels even more precious in winter. Milking is a daily ritual, one that requires patience and care. You settle onto a small wooden stool, placing a bucket beneath her, and beginning the rhythmic task. The milk flows steadily, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill in the air. The chickens too demand attention. They've been producing fewer eggs since the cold set in a natural response to the shortened daylight hours. Still, you gather what they've laid, cradling the fragile shells in your hands. These eggs are a luxury often reserved for special meals or barter with neighbors. Feeding the animals is next. You distribute hay to the cow and sheep, ensuring they have enough to sustain them through the day. The chickens peck eagerly at the handful of grain you scatter on the ground. Keeping your livestock healthy is no small feat in winter, and you find yourself constantly checking for signs of illness or frostbite. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants fully understood the science of animal husbandry, but their practical knowledge was undeniable. Generations of trial and error had taught them how to care for their animals through the harshest conditions. By midday, you're back indoors, your cheeks flushed from the cold. Today's meal is a simple one: bread and cheese accompanied by a small mug of ale. The bread is dense and slightly stale, but it fills your stomach. The cheese made from the milk you've collected over the past weeks is sharp and flavorful. Ale is the drink of choice, not just for its taste, but because it's safer than water, which can carry illness. As you eat, your mind drifts to the communal aspects of village life. Winter is a time for relying on neighbors, sharing resources and labor to make the season more bearable. You recall a recent evening spent in the company of others, huddled together in a larger house for warmth. Stories were exchanged, songs were sung, and for a moment the weight of the season felt lighter. Evenings like those often include the exchange of news and advice. Someone might share a new method for preserving food or repairing tools, while another recounts a humorous tale to lift spirits. These gatherings remind you that while winter is harsh, it's also a time of connection, a season that fosters community in ways the warmer months rarely do. This afternoon, you have a special task: repairing tools. The iron blade of your scythe has grown dull, and the wooden handle shows signs of wear. You set up a small workspace near the fire, using basic tools to sharpen the blade and reinforce the handle. Every tool you own is essential, and neglecting maintenance could mean disaster when spring arrives. As you work, the flickering firelight catches on the metal, creating a dance of light and shadow. You feel a sense of satisfaction in the task, a reminder that even in the depths of winter, there's value in preparation. One tool that often needs attention in winter is the wooden plow. Though it won't see use until the thaw, ensuring its readiness now will save you valuable time later. You run your hands over the smooth wood, checking for cracks or splinters. The plow's iron blade is inspected and cleaned, ensuring it will cut through the earth with ease when the time comes. Later, as the sun begins its descent, you step outside to gather more firewood. The forest is silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. You scan the ground for fallen branches, knowing that every piece of wood you collect will make the night a little more bearable. Carrying the heavy bundle back to the house, you reflect on the constant effort winter demands. There's no room for idleness. Every moment is spent working towards survival. Yet there's also a sense of pride in it, a recognition of your ability to endure. As night falls, the fire roars to life once more, its heat driving back the cold. You sit nearby, stitching a small tear in your cloak, while listening to the sounds of the village settling in for the evening. The faint laughter of children, the low murmur of conversation, and the distant howl of a wolf all blend into a symphony of winter. Tomorrow will bring more of the same chores challenges and moments of quiet satisfaction. But for now, you allow yourself a moment of rest, letting the warmth of the fire lull you into a sense of calm. The following morning, you wake to a fresh blanket of snow covering the village. The world outside your shuttered window seems quiet and still muffled under the thick white layer. Winter brings a certain beauty to the land, but it also adds another layer of difficulty to daily life. You can already feel the chill seeping through the walls of your home, and you know that venturing out today will require more effort than usual. Your first task is to clear a path from your home to the barn and the village center. Armed with a simple wooden shovel, you push the heavy snow aside, creating a narrow walkway. The exercise warms your muscles, but it's hard work, and your breath comes in visible puffs. The snow isn't just inconvenient, it's a hazard. If left to pile up, it could block doorways or collapse the roofs of weaker structures. As you work, you notice other villagers doing the same. Each person is focused on their own patch of snow, but there's an unspoken camaraderie in the shared effort. Occasionally, someone pauses to exchange a greeting or offer a hand, reinforcing the sense of community that holds the village together. With the path cleared, you head to the barn to tend to your animals. The routine is familiar but more challenging today. The cow's water trough is frozen over, and you use a small axe to break the ice. The chickens, reluctant to leave their coop, need extra coaxing and an extra handful of grain to keep them active. Ensuring your livestock stays healthy in such conditions is a constant worry, but you know their survival is crucial to your own. By midday, you're ready to join a group of villagers heading into the nearby forest to gather firewood. It's a risky endeavor in winter, but necessary. The forest provides not only fuel for your hearth, but also a chance to forage for anything edible berries, clinging stubbornly to bushes, nuts hidden beneath the snow, or even small game if someone is lucky with the snare. As you trudge through the woods, the snow crunching underfoot, you're struck by the silence. The forest in winter is a world of its own, its usual sounds muted. The bare branches of the trees stretch like skeletal fingers toward the sky, and your breath fogs the air as you walk. The cold bites at your fingers and toes despite your heavy layers, and you remind yourself to keep moving. The group works together to gather as much wood as possible, using small axes to chop branches and fallen logs. The task requires care not just to conserve energy, but also to avoid injury. A simple cut or sprain in winter could mean disaster without proper treatment. Despite the harsh conditions, there's a sense of shared purpose that keeps spirits relatively high. Historians still debate how medieval peasants managed to balance the labor of survival with moments of leisure, but evidence suggests they found ways to make even the most arduous tasks bearable. As you work, someone begins to sing a simple, repetitive tune that soon spreads through the group. The melody is comforting, a reminder that even in the coldest, darkest times, humanity has always found ways to create warmth. By the time you return to the village, your arms are aching from the weight of the firewood, but you feel a sense of accomplishment. The woodpile outside your house grows taller, a tangible measure of your preparedness for the nights ahead. Back indoors, you warm yourself by the fire, letting the heat seep into your chilled bones. Today's meal is a hearty stew made from root vegetables stored in the cellar. Carrots, parsnips, and onions simmer together with a few pieces of dried meat, creating a fragrant dish that feels like a small luxury. You savor each bite, knowing that every meal in winter is a victory. As the day wanes, you prepare for an important evening event, a communal gathering in the village hall. These gatherings are vital during the winter months, not just for their warmth, but also for the exchange of news supplies and morale. The hall is one of the largest buildings in the village, its stone walls and thatched roof offering a sense of security. Inside, the space is lit by flickering torches and a roaring central fire. Villagers crowd together on wooden benches, their cloaks and scarves, adding splashes of color to the dim room. Someone begins to speak, sharing news of a successful hunt, while others distribute small bundles of preserved food to those in need. The evening is not without its lighter moments. Stories are told ranging from tales of brave knights to humorous anecdotes about everyday life. One elderly woman recounts a story about a goose that once chased her through the village, her animated gestures and exaggerated expressions drawing laughter from the crowd. The gathering also serves a practical purpose. Villagers share advice on dealing with the cold, from techniques for insulating walls to methods of preserving food longer. Someone mentions using hot stones wrapped in cloth to warm beds at night, a trick you make a mental note to try. As the fire burns lower, the mood in the hall becomes quieter, more reflective. Someone begins to sing a soft, mournful tune, their voice filling the space with a haunting beauty. The song speaks of loss and longing, but also of hope, a reminder that winter, like all things, will eventually pass. When the gathering ends, you step back into the cold night, your breath visible in the moonlight. The village is quiet now, the only sounds the crunch of snow underfoot and the distant howl of a wolf. You pull your cloak tighter around you, grateful for the firewood stacked by your door and the warmth waiting inside. As you settle in for the night, the memories of the day linger. Winter is a season of challenges, but it's also a time of resilience and connection. You feel the weight of the cold, but also the strength it has given you, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions there is beauty to be found. The night stretches long and cold, the fire in your hearth crackling faintly as it burns low. Sleep comes fitfully broken by the howling wind that seems intent on testing the limits of your home's defenses. You stir beneath layers of blankets, your breath visible in the chilly air, and you can't help but think of those medieval nights when peasants relied on every ounce of ingenuity to keep warm. It wasn't just the fire that kept the biting cold at bay. You remember that medieval homes, especially those belonging to peasants, were designed with survival in mind, even if they were far from comfortable by today's standards. Thick walls made of wattle and daub, though drafty, provided a measure of insulation. The roof, often thatched with straw, was both a blessing and a curse, helping to trap warmth, but also inviting uninvited guests like mice and insects to share the space. On nights like this, families would huddle together, not just for company, but for shared body heat. Beds were a luxury for many, so sleeping arrangements were often communal with straw mattresses spread out on the floor. In some homes, livestock were brought indoors not just for their protection, but also for the warmth they provided. Imagine drifting off to sleep with the gentle snuffling of a pig or the soft breathing of a cow nearby. The fire, however, was the true lifeline. It was never allowed to go out completely, even at night. The hearth was the heart of the home, its warmth and light a source of comfort and security. Someone, often the eldest or youngest member of the household, was tasked with keeping the embers alive, using a poker to stir them gently and adding bits of kindling as needed. It was a duty taken seriously, for waking up to a frozen home could be disastrous. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly mastered fire management, or if it was often a matter of luck. After all, with no matches or lighters, reigniting a fire from scratch was a painstaking process involving flint and steel, or in some cases borrowing embers from a neighbor. Losing your fire in the dead of winter was more than an inconvenience, it was a matter of life and death. As you lie there snug in your imagined medieval home, you think about how people used every available resource to enhance their chances of staying warm. Clothing, for instance, was layered and functional. Wool was the fabric of choice, prized for its ability to retain heat even when damp. Cloaks, often fastened with simple brooches, were an essential outer layer, and stockings or hose helped protect legs from the chill. On particularly cold nights, people might even sleep in their outer garments, wrapping themselves up like human burritos. Footwear was another challenge. Sturdy leather shoes could keep feet dry during the day, but at night, peasants often relied on woolen wraps or simply tucked their feet under a shared blanket. Heated stones were a clever solution, placed near the fire and then wrapped in cloth to provide warmth for cold toes. One quirky tidbit comes to mind: the use of pets, particularly dogs, as makeshift bed warmers. The phrase three-dog night is often associated with later periods, but the concept likely has older roots. The more dogs you had in bed, the warmer you were. It's a practical, albeit amusing, solution to winter's chill. Your thoughts wander to the other ways medieval people made the most of their limited resources. Herbs and spices, though rare and valuable, were sometimes used for more than flavor. A handful of juniper branches thrown on the fire could create a fragrant, warming smoke, while dried lavender or thyme was tucked into bedding to ward off pests and add a soothing scent. The sense of ingenuity extended to architecture too. Some homes featured a central fire pit rather than a fireplace, allowing the heat to radiate more evenly. The smoke, while unpleasant, had its advantages. It helped deter insects and ironically preserve the thatched roof by preventing mold growth. Still, you can imagine the sting of smoky air on a cold night, eyes watering as you adjusted to the fumes. As the hours pass, you picture yourself stirring the embers of the fire, adding another log to ensure it burns steadily through the night. Outside, the wind continues to howl, but within your small medieval home, there's a sense of resilience. Each crackle of the fire feels like a defiance against the cold, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, humans have always found ways to endure. Morning eventually arrives, its light pale and muted against the snow-covered landscape. You rise, stretching stiff limbs, and prepare for another day of winter's challenges. The fire, now reduced to glowing embers, is the first order of business. You stoke it back to life, feeding it carefully until the flames rise once more. The warmth spreads slowly through the room, and you feel a flicker of gratitude for this small but vital victory. Stepping outside, you see the village stirring to life. Smoke curls from chimneys, and the sounds of daily chores begin to echo across the frosty air. Winter may be unforgiving, but it also fosters a sense of togetherness. Everyone is in the same fight, battling the cold with whatever means they have. As you join your neighbors in the morning's tasks, you think about how medieval peasants face these challenges, not with despair, but with determination. Their lives were hard, but their resourcefulness, community spirit, and connection to the rhythms of the natural world helped them survive. You pull your cloak tighter, watching your breath swirl in the air, and feel a quiet admiration for those who came before. They may not have had modern comforts, but they had firewool in each other, and sometimes that was enough. As the morning frost clings to the fields and rooftops, you step outside into a world that feels simultaneously beautiful and biting. Winter in a medieval village was not just a test of endurance. It was a cycle of work, preparation, and survival. Your breath creates clouds of steam as you walk toward the village, well carrying a wooden bucket in each hand. The cold is sharp enough to sting, but the promise of fresh water for the day drives you forward. For a peasant, winter mornings often began with fetching water. Wells were a lifeline dug deep into the earth to access clean, drinkable water. But even this simple task was fraught with challenges during the coldest months. The surface of the well might freeze overnight, requiring a sturdy iron rod to break through the ice. You imagine the sound it makes, a sharp, echoing crack as you strike the frozen surface. Drawing water from the well wasn't merely a task. It was a moment of community. As villagers gathered muffled in their cloaks and scarves, they exchanged greetings and tidbits of news. Who had seen wolf tracks near the woods? Whose roof needed mending after the storm? These moments of connection were vital during a season that could otherwise feel isolating. Once the buckets are filled, you trudge back to your home, the water sloshing gently with each step. Inside, you're greeted by the earthy smell of drying herbs hanging from the rafters. These bundles of sage, rosemary, and thyme were gathered during the warmer months, their preservation a testament to the careful planning that winter survival demanded. Food, of course, was always on your mind. Winter meals were simple but hearty, designed to provide warmth and sustenance. Pottage, a thick stew-like dish, was a staple. Made from whatever ingredients were available, it often included root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, dried beans, and a handful of barley or oats. Meat was a rarity reserved for special occasions, but if you were lucky, you might have a small piece of salted pork or a smoked fish to add to the pot. You think about the effort that went into preserving these ingredients. Salting, smoking, and drying were the primary methods, each requiring time, skill, and resources. Even a single mistake could mean the difference between a pantry stocked with provisions and one filled with spoiled food. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants had access to enough protein to sustain themselves through the harsh winters, or if they relied heavily on bread and gruel for their caloric intake. Speaking of bread, you recall how it was a cornerstone of medieval diets. Baking was often a communal activity, with villagers using a shared oven to conserve resources. In winter, this oven became even more important, its steady heat offering a brief respite from the cold. The smell of baking bread, rich, nutty, and slightly smoky, was a small comfort on even the harshest days. The bread itself was far from the soft loaves we enjoy today. Coarse and dense, it was made from whatever grain was available, often a mix of rye barley and oats. Wheat being more expensive was a luxury for most peasants. You tear off a piece in your mind, feeling the rough texture against your fingers. And imagine how it tastes earthy with a hint of sourness from the natural fermentation process. As the day unfolds, you turn your attention to other essential tasks. The firewood pile needs replenishing, and so you head out into the forest with a sturdy axe slung over your shoulder. Cutting wood is back-breaking work, but it's also meditative. Each swing of the axe sends a satisfying crack through the air as the log splits cleanly in two. You stack the wood carefully, knowing that every piece represents an evening of warmth. While in the forest, you notice the tracks of animals in the snow rabbit steer, and perhaps a fox or two. Hunting was a risky endeavor, often requiring the Lord's permission, but it could mean the difference between hunger and a full stomach. You picture a hunter, bow in hand, moving silently through the trees, his breath visible as he waits for the perfect moment to strike. Not all food came from hunting or farming, though. Foraging was a year-round activity, even in winter. Villagers gathered what they could: berries frozen on the vine-edible roots, and even the bark of certain trees which could be ground into flour in desperate times. These foraged items were often added to the ever-present pottage, stretching the meal and adding a touch of variety. Returning home, your arms laden with firewood, you think about how even the simplest tasks were made harder by the cold. Washing clothes, for instance, was a chore best avoided in winter. Without modern detergents or machines, laundry was done by hand using harsh lye soap. In summer, clothes could be dried in the sun, but in winter they often froze stiff before they dried, leaving you to wonder if it was worth the effort at all. Despite the hardships, there was a rhythm to these days that brought a sense of purpose. Every action, from fetching water to chopping wood, was a step towards survival. And survival itself was a kind of triumph, a quiet victory against the forces of nature. As evening approaches, you prepare for another long night. The fire burns brightly, its light dancing on the walls, and the smell of pottage fills the air. Outside, the wind picks up again, rattling the shutters, and reminding you of the cold that still lingers just beyond the door. You settle in for the night, wrapping yourself in layers and feeling the warmth seep into your bones. The day has been long and tiring, but as you drift off to sleep, you feel a sense of gratitude for the small comforts you've managed to create. In a world where survival was never guaranteed, these moments of warmth and security were precious beyond measure. The world outside your window is a study in contrast. Brilliant white snow under a pale gray sky. The cold is sharper today, slicing through your clothing, no matter how many layers you wear. Winter, you think, isn't just a season, it's a force of nature, relentless and indifferent. And for medieval peasants, it was both an adversary to battle and a teacher of resilience. The first task of the day is to check on the animals. Livestock was a precious resource, providing milk, meat, wool, and manure for fertilizing fields. But winter was as hard on them as it was on you. You step into the barn greeted by the familiar scent of straw and the low, rhythmic sounds of animals shifting in their stalls. The cows exhale great plumes of steam, their breath warm and comforting in the frigid air. You check their feed pulling hay from the loft above. The hay smells faintly of summer, a nostalgic reminder of warmer days when it was cut and stacked under a blazing sun. Now it's a lifeline keeping the animals alive until spring grass returns. You make a mental note of how much remains, knowing that rationing will be crucial if this winter drags on longer than expected. The chickens cluck softly as you scatter a handful of grain, their feathers fluffed up against the cold. Eggs are scarce in winter, the short days and cold temperatures reducing their laying. Still, you search their nests, hoping for a small miracle, a single egg to add to the day's meals. It's a reminder of how every scrap of food was valued, nothing taken for granted. You can't help but think of the medieval calendars that marked the agricultural year. These labors of the months often depicted peasants tending to animals in the depths of winter, huddled against the cold. Historians still argue whether such scenes romanticized the peasant experience or captured its unvarnished reality. After ensuring the animals are fed and warm, you head back toward the house, your boots crunching in the snow. The icy wind bites at your face and you pull your cloak tighter, wishing for the warmth of the hearth. Fire, you realize, is more than just a source of heat. It's a symbol of life, a fragile flame that must be carefully tended to survive. Inside, the fire crackles in the hearth, its orange glow illuminating the room. You sit close to it, rubbing your hands together to chase away the chill. The hearth was the heart of the home in medieval times, a place where cooking, storytelling, and family gatherings all took place. The scent of burning wood mingles with the faint aroma of last night's pottage still simmering in the pot. You glance at the pot, knowing that stretching food supplies required creativity and resourcefulness. Even bones which might seem useless to us today were boiled into rich, savory broths. These broths not only added flavor, but also provided essential nutrients, a trick medieval peasants likely discovered through necessity. As the morning unfolds, you think about the social dynamics of the village during winter. With fewer outdoor tasks to occupy the days, there was more time for communal activities. You recall the villagers gathering for spinning bees where wool was turned into thread amidst laughter and gossip. These gatherings weren't just about work, they were a way to stay connected, to remind one another that no one faced the hardships of winter alone. On occasion, the village would come together for a winter feast. These feasts were modest affairs compared to the grand banquets of the nobility, but they held their own charm. A roasted goose or pig might take center stage, accompanied by thick slices of bread and mugs of ale. The room would buzz with energy, the warmth of the fire matched by the warmth of friendship and community. Entertainment during these gatherings was simple but heartfelt. Someone might play a lute or sing a ballad, their voice rising and falling like the flicker of the flames. Children would chase one another around the room, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the howling wind outside. And always there were stories, tales of daring knights, clever tricksters, and the occasional ghost to keep things interesting. As you think about these moments of joy, you're reminded of how much medieval life revolved around the cycle of the seasons. Winter was a time to endure, yes, but also a time to reflect and prepare. The tasks of the day were smaller, quieter, but no less important. You picture a family gathered around the fire, mending clothes, sharpening tools, and planning for the spring planting that felt so far away. One curious tradition comes to mind: the practice of wassailing. This ancient custom involved singing and drinking to the health of the apple trees, a way of ensuring a good harvest in the coming year. You imagine a group of villagers braving the cold, their voices rising in song as they pour cider around the roots of the trees. It's a strange, almost magical ritual, but one that speaks to the deep connection medieval people felt with the land and its cycles. By midday, the sun is faintly visible through the gray clouds, offering no warmth but a small reminder that it still exists. You take a moment to appreciate the beauty of the landscape, the way the snow sparkles like tiny diamonds under the weak sunlight. For all its hardships, winter had its own kind of grace, a quiet, introspective beauty that could be easily missed in the struggle to survive. As the day wanes, you return to your home, the cold settling in once more. The fire is banked high, its warmth spreading through the room like a comforting embrace. You sit by the hearth, listening to the wind outside and feeling a sense of gratitude for the shelter and provisions that keep you safe. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, but for now, you allow yourself a moment of peace. You lean back, close your eyes, and let the crackling of the fire lull you into a sense of calm. Winter may be harsh, but in this moment you feel its quiet power, not as an enemy, but as a reminder of the strength and resilience that define you. Night falls swiftly, bringing with it a deeper chill that seeps into your bones. The darkness feels heavier in winter, pressing against the windows and curling into the corners of your home. You stoke the fire once more, the flames leaping and casting dancing shadows on the walls. It's a small barrier against the vast cold outside, but it's enough for now. As you sit by the hearth, your thoughts wander to the ingenuity medieval peasants employed to survive these long, frigid nights. Sleeping arrangements, for instance, weren't just a matter of comfort, but of survival. Families often shared a single bed or slept together in the same room, using body heat to stave off the cold. Layers of woolen blankets, patched and repatched over the years, were piled high, creating a cocoon of warmth. Your bed isn't exactly luxurious. It's a wooden frame stuffed with straw, perhaps, with a thin feather mattress if you're lucky. The straw crackles softly as you settle in its earthy scent, mingling with the smoky air from the fire. Overhead, a canopy made from old fabric might hang, serving as a barrier against drafts and the occasional unwelcome visitor from the thatched roof above. You think about the superstitions tied to sleep in this era. Medieval people believed that dreams could carry messages or warnings, a link between the mortal world and the divine. The idea of night demons or spirits stealing into homes was also prevalent, leading to protective charms being tucked beneath pillows or hung near the bed. Even the layout of a home was designed with these beliefs in mind, with beds placed in ways thought to shield sleepers from malevolent forces. As the fire burns low, you picture the village outside, shrouded in darkness and silence. But not everyone is asleep. The night watchman, perhaps a rotating role among the villagers, patrols the narrow paths with a lantern in hand. His job is to keep an eye out for wolves or wandering strangers, ensuring the safety of the community. You imagine his footsteps crunching in the snow, the faint glow of his lantern moving like a firefly in the distance. The sound of the wind picks up a mournful whistle that wraps around the house. You pull your blanket tighter and think about how medieval homes were built to withstand these conditions, at least to a point. Walls made of wattle and daub, a mixture of woven wooden slats, and mud provided insulation, while the thatched roof trapped heat. Still, these homes weren't airtight, and drafts were an inevitable companion during winter. To combat the cold, families often relied on portable braziers, small metal containers filled with glowing embers. These could be carried from room to room, offering localized warmth. However, they came with their own dangers, as the risk of fire or carbon monoxide poisoning was ever present. You imagine a brazier set near the bed, its dull red glow providing just enough warmth to keep the chill at bay. Your mind drifts to the communal efforts that marked these nights. The long winter evenings were often spent together with families and neighbors, sharing stories or songs. These weren't just idle pastimes, they were ways to preserve oral histories and pass down traditions. Tales of legendary heroes, saints, and even mischievous spirits filled the air, drawing everyone closer to the firelight. One popular tale might have involved Saint Nicholas, whose acts of generosity were legendary in medieval Europe. You picture children huddled close, their eyes wide, as they hear about how Saint Nicholas secretly left gifts for the needy. It's a story that carried hope and warmth, much like the hearth they sat beside. The evening wasn't without its work, though. Women often used these hours for spinning or weaving, their hands deftly moving as they turned wool into thread or fabric. Men might sharpen tools or carve small objects, their efforts illuminated by the flickering fire. Even children had tasks, from mending clothes to helping prepare the next day's meals. You're reminded of a peculiar practice: warming stones. Large flat stones were heated in the hearth and then wrapped in cloth before being placed at the foot of the bed. These rudimentary bed warmers were surprisingly effective, holding heat for hours. You can almost feel the comforting weight of one near your feet, a simple yet ingenious solution to the cold. Outside, the landscape is still and otherworldly, the snow reflecting the moonlight in a way that makes the night seem brighter than it should be. You think about the wildlife enduring the same cold: foxes, curled in their dens, owls, perched silently in the trees, their eyes scanning the ground for movement. The harshness of winter is a shared experience, connecting all living things in a quiet struggle for survival. Back inside, the fire begins to die down and the room grows colder. You add another log, watching as the flames catch and grow. The smell of the wood smoke is comforting, a reminder of the ancient relationship between humans and fire. It's a partnership that has spanned millennia, a constant in an ever-changing world. As you settle back into bed, you think about the rhythm of these winter nights. They're long and quiet, but they're also a time of connection between family, community, and the natural world. There's a certain beauty in the simplicity of it all. A reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life finds a way to endure. The wind outside finally quiets and the house is still. The fire burns low but steady, its glow a beacon of warmth in the darkness. You close your eyes, the weight of the day falling away as sleep begins to take hold. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, but for now you rest cocooned in the small, fragile bubble of warmth and light that you've created. The coldest nights of winter were a trial, but they also forged routines and habits that kept medieval peasants not just alive, but deeply connected to their environment and each other. Tonight, as the fire flickers low and the house creaks under the weight of the cold, your thoughts turn to how people faced the biting frost when resources were scarce. Midwinter was the time when food preservation methods were truly tested. Peasants relied heavily on stores of salted or smoked meat, dried fish, and grains that had been painstakingly gathered and prepared during the harvest months. A winter's feast might seem modest by modern standards, perhaps a pottage made from dried peas and barley flavored with a bit of lard or the occasional scrap of meat. But in these humble meals lay the ingenuity of a people who knew how to stretch every ounce of sustenance. Tonight's meal is simple but hearty. You ladle steaming pottage into wooden bowls that smell earthy and satisfying. Bread, perhaps coarse and dark from rye flour, accompanies the meal, slightly stale, but revived when dipped into the hot stew. Butter or cheese, if available, would be precious luxuries carefully rationed to last through the season. After dinner, the family gathers close to the fire. This isn't just for warmth, it's also for light, as candles are a rare and costly commodity. The fire becomes the center of the home, a place where stories are shared and small tasks are completed. You can imagine children sitting on the floor, their cheeks flushed from the fire's heat, as an elder recounts tales of night saints or cautionary folklore. One story that might emerge is that of the Yule log, a tradition steeped in symbolism and practicality. A massive log, often selected months in advance, would be burned in the hearth during midwinter to provide continuous warmth and light. The Yule log's embers were believed to protect the household and ensure prosperity for the coming year. In some regions, the ashes were scattered in fields to encourage a bountiful harvest. As the evening wears on, the fire must be carefully managed. Wood is a finite resource, and gathering it in the depths of winter is both dangerous and labor-intensive. Every log represents hours of effort, chopping, hauling, and stacking. You picture the woodpile outside covered in snow and feel a pang of gratitude for the work that ensures your home stays warm. The coldest nights also required creative solutions to keep warm without overtaxing the firewood supply. Layers of clothing became essential. Wool was the fabric of choice thanks to its insulating properties. You imagine yourself wrapped in a heavy woolen tunic, a linen underlayer, and perhaps a cloak lined with fur if you were lucky enough to own one. These layers weren't just for outdoors. They were often worn to bed, where the chill could seep into every corner of the house. Bedtime rituals in a medieval household were practical and communal. A shared bed wasn't just an economic necessity. It was a way to preserve heat. You picture yourself lying shoulder to shoulder with family members, your combined body heat, creating a warm cocoon beneath layers of blankets and quilts. The youngest or most vulnerable members of the household were often placed in the center, shielded from the cold by others. Your thoughts drift to the livestock outside, huddled in the barn or stable. Animals were a vital part of the household, providing food labor and even warmth. In some cases, they were brought inside during the coldest nights, their body heat helping to warm the living space. You can almost hear the soft lowing of cattle or the occasional rustle of straw as they shift in their sleep. As the fire burns lower, you're reminded of the superstitions surrounding winter nights. In medieval Europe, the long darkness was thought to be a time when spirits and otherworldly beings roamed freely. Protective charms such as iron horseshoes or sprigs of holly were placed around homes to ward off malevolent forces. You glance at the doorway, imagining a talisman hanging there, its presence offering a sense of security against the unknown. Outside, the world is quiet but alive in its own way. The snow reflects the faint light of the moon, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The occasional sound of an owl hooting or a branch snapping in the forest reminds you that life continues even in the harshest conditions. You think of the hunters and foragers who braved the cold to find food, their survival, depending on their knowledge of the land and its rhythms. Back inside, the warmth of the fire begins to fade as the embers turn to ash. You bank the fire, carefully covering the coals to preserve them for the morning. It's a skill learned from necessity, ensuring that you won't have to start a new fire from scratch in the bitter cold of dawn. As you prepare for bed, you think about the resilience of medieval peasants. Their lives were a delicate balance of hardship and ingenuity, shaped by the cycles of nature and the limits of their resources. Yet there's a certain beauty in their way of life, a connection to the earth, to the changing seasons, and to each other. You settle beneath your blankets, the weight of the day easing as sleep begins to claim you. Outside, the cold remains, but within these walls, you've created a space of warmth and safety. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but for now, you rest knowing that you've done all you can to weather the winter night. The harshest winters didn't just test the resilience of medieval peasants, they also demanded resourcefulness and a willingness to adapt. As you wake on another frosty morning, the air sharp and crisp, you feel the weight of the season pressing down. Winter wasn't just a time to survive, it was a time to endure, to think ahead, and to use every available resource wisely. The first task of the day is rekindling the fire. You uncover the embers banked the previous night, gently coaxing them back to life with bits of dried grass or thin twigs. It's a delicate art, one that requires patience and care, and you find yourself grateful for the warmth that spreads as the flames catch. The fire is more than a source of heat, it's the heart of the home, the center of daily life. Breakfast is a simple affair. You stir porridge made from oats or barley, the steam rising from the pot in soft, curling tendrils. There's no sugar to sweeten it, but perhaps you have a bit of honey saved from the warmer months, or a handful of dried fruit to add flavor. As you eat, you can't help but think about the long day ahead, filled with tasks that can't wait no matter how cold it is outside. One of the most pressing concerns during winter is maintaining the food supply. With the fields frozen and the livestock relying on stored fodder, every morsel is precious. You head to the storage area, checking on the sacks of grain and the barrels of salted meat. There's a sense of satisfaction in seeing these stores, proof of your hard work and preparation during the harvest. But there's also a sense of urgency, a need to make everything last until spring. Today's work involves mending and repairing. Winter is the perfect time for tasks that don't require outdoor labor. And you sit by the fire with a needle and thread patching worn clothing, and stitching together new garments from old scraps of fabric. Wool socks, mittens, and hats are essential, and you marvel at the skill and patience required to create these items by hand. You think of the children who often spent their winter days learning practical skills. They might sit beside you, their small hands clumsily attempting to sew or carve wood. Education wasn't formal for most peasant children, but life itself was a school. They learned by watching, by doing, and by listening to the stories and wisdom passed down from their elders. Outside, the world is still and quiet, but life continues in its own way. The animals need feeding and care, their warmth and productivity vital to the household. You step into the barn, the air heavy with the smell of hay and the sound of soft breathing. The cows and sheep look up at you, their eyes calm and expectant, and you feel a deep sense of connection to these creatures who share your struggle against the cold. The afternoon brings another critical task, fetching water. With the ground frozen, wells and streams are the only sources, and drawing water is no small feat. You carry heavy buckets back to the house, your breath visible in the icy air. It's exhausting work, but it's also a reminder of the strength required to survive these long winters. As the day wears on, you think about the communal aspects of medieval life. Villages were tight-knit communities where neighbors relied on one another for support. On the coldest days, people might gather in a single home, pooling their resources and sharing warmth. The fire would be larger, the stories livelier, and for a few hours the burden of winter would feel a little lighter. One of the most challenging aspects of winter was the lack of light. With the days so short and candles so precious, most activities had to be completed before dusk. As the sun dips below the horizon, you light a single tallow candle, its flame small but steady. You wonder how people found the courage to face the long, dark nights, knowing that spring was still months away. Superstition and faith played a significant role in getting through the winter. People believed in the protective power of rituals and prayers, invoking saints to watch over their homes and families. You think of the small altar in the corner of the room adorned with simple carvings or painted icons, a focal point for hope and devotion. Even in the darkest times, there were moments of joy. Winter holidays such as Yuletide or the Feast of St. Nicholas brought a sense of celebration and community. You imagine the flicker of lanterns as neighbors gather, the sound of laughter and music filling the air. These occasions were a reminder that even in the hardest seasons there was room for happiness and connection. As the evening draws to a close, you settle by the fire once more, your hands busy with small tasks. The shadows dance on the walls and the crackle of the flames is soothing. You feel a sense of accomplishment in having made it through another day, the routines and rituals of winter giving structure to your life. Before bed, you take a moment to reflect on the resilience and ingenuity of medieval peasants. Their lives were shaped by the challenges of the natural world, but they met those challenges with determination and creativity. You feel a deep respect for their ability to not only survive, but to find meaning and purpose in the face of hardship. As you climb into bed, the weight of the blankets, a comforting cocoon, you can't help but marvel at the strength of the human spirit. Winter may be relentless, but so too is the will to endure, to adapt, and to find beauty, even in the coldest of nights. You wake to the faint glow of dawn slipping through a frost-cracked window pane, the cold biting sharper than last night. The ground outside is a patchwork quilt of ice and snow, and as you rise, you feel the familiar ache of muscles stiffened by the chill. Winter's grip hasn't loosened, but the rhythm of daily survival pushes you forward. Today, you're tasked with gathering firewood, the lifeblood of warmth in these frozen months. The woods stand silent, their branches heavy with frost as you trudge through knee-deep snow. Each breath you exhale forms a small cloud that quickly vanishes into the crisp air. Your hands clutch a crude wooden staff for balance, the rough bark scraping against your woolen gloves. It's backbreaking work, but you know the pile of wood waiting at the cottage will mean the difference between a night spent shivering and one held in comforting heat. You spot a fallen branch, brittle and dry, snapped cleanly by last autumn's storms. It's perfect. As you break it into manageable lengths, you notice small marks on the bark, crude carvings, maybe a child's secret message or a hunter's tally. It's a tiny detail, but it reminds you that even in harsh times, people left traces of their lives, little signatures of presence. Historians still argue whether these carvings were simple marks or secret codes passed among woodland folk. Back at the cottage, you stack the wood carefully by the hearth, mindful of the way air moves, allowing the pile to dry properly. Firewood is precious and wet or poorly stored wood won't burn well. Something that can turn a long winter night into an unbearable ordeal. Nearby, the cat curls lazily on a patch of sunlit floor, seemingly immune to the cold, while you marvel at the simple life it leads unbothered by the seasons. You start preparing a stew, a mix of root vegetables, some salted meat, and barley. The pot hangs over the fire, the scent of cooking filling the room, and blending with the smoky aroma of burning wood. You pause to savor the warmth radiating from the flames. In those moments, the fire feels almost sacred, a guardian against the cold and darkness. As you eat, you think about medieval peasants' diets during winter. It wasn't just about filling stomachs, it was about preserving strength and health. They often relied on salted, smoked, or pickled foods, stored carefully since summer's abundance had long passed. Vitamin deficiency was common, and you wonder how they balanced survival with nutrition. Interestingly, some fringe historians speculate that certain herbs or fungi might have been used medicinally to ward off scurvy, though that's still debated. With the day's light waning, you gather your tools. An iron axe with a wooden haft, a woven basket for gathering herbs, and head outside again. There's a small patch near the cottage where wild greens poke through the snow. Hardy plants that somehow survive winter's bite. You collect what you can, knowing these little bits of fresh food might boost morale and health. Evening brings another gathering of the household. You share stories, laughter muffled by thick woolen garments. The fire's glow flickering across faces tired but content. Sometimes you trade news of other villages or share odd tales of winter spirits said to wander the forests, seeking warmth from human fires. Whether you believe those stories or not, they add a spark of magic to the bleakness of winter nights. The candlelight flickers low as you prepare for sleep. The sounds outside muted beneath a blanket of frost. You pause at the window, watching the stars twinkle in the cold sky, each one a tiny beacon of hope. You remind yourself that no winter lasts forever, that beneath this frozen silence lies the promise of spring's return. In the quiet, you think about the resilience needed to live like this, how every task, no matter how small, is a thread in a larger tapestry of survival and community. Medieval peasants weren't just enduring the cold. They were living lives rich with ritual hope and an unyielding connection to the land and each other. You wake once more to the brittle silence of a world draped in ice, your breath steaming in the frosty air. Outside, the frozen earth glistens under a pale sun, struggling to rise above the low horizon. Today, you must turn your attention to clothing the armor against winter's bite that will keep your fingers from freezing and your spirit from breaking. Your linen undergarments, thin and threadbare, are no match for the chill. So you layer woolen tunics dyed in deep indigo and russet colors made from local plants and minerals, faded by countless winters. The coarse wool itches against your skin, but it traps heat well. And you pull your heavy cloak tighter around your shoulders, its clasp shaped like a simple iron ring. Footwear is another story, wooden-soled shoes, lined with straw, wet and cold, and often patched with leather scraps. Your fingers work clumsily as you mend a torn glove using a bone needle and thread made from animal sinew. Medieval peasants had few options for warmth beyond layers, and you realize how much their clothing had to serve as portable insulation. You recall that dyeing fabric was an expensive art, and the richest peasants might have a splash of saffron or teal to brighten their outfits. But most wore browns and grays, colors that hid dirt and wear. Historians still argue whether the natural dyes offered any real protection beyond vanity. Some say certain plants might have had mild insect-repelling properties. Others think it's just folklore. The cold gnaws at your ears and nose, so you fashion a hood from thick wool, tying it beneath your chin. As you work, you wonder how medieval people dealt with frostbite before modern medicine. One quirky theory suggests that some peasants used animal fat or crushed herbs as rudimentary ointments to protect skin, though it's hard to know how widespread such practices were. Dressing for winter is a slow ritual, a daily preparation for battle against the elements. You step outside and feel the crunch of frozen earth beneath your patched shoes. The forest looms quiet and still, as if holding its breath while the low winter sun casts long blue shadows across the landscape. Your breath clouds in the air, each exhale a reminder that warmth is precious and fleeting. Inside your humble home, a wooden cradle rocks. Gently near the hearth, where a baby sleeps wrapped in swaddling cloth, dyed in a soft teal. The warmth of the fire is crucial here, and you glance at the iron fire tongs hanging nearby, tools as important as any weapon. They manage the flames that keep families alive through endless cold nights. You're struck by the fact that even with all these defenses, medieval peasants still face the harshest risk exposure, illness, and the ever-present threat of famine. Their world was one where clothing wasn't just fashion, it was survival. Sometimes you imagine them sitting close around the fire, sharing whispered stories of better days and colder nights, trying to find comfort in shared hardship. As the day wanes, you sit by the fire mending clothes and reflecting on the small victories of warmth and protection. The crackle of burning wood and the faint scent of smoke fill the air, wrapping around you like an old worn blanket. You realize that surviving the coldest nights wasn't about grand feats, but simple acts, repeated daily acts of patience, ingenuity, and hope. You awake again to the creeping chill of dawn, the sky awash of pale gray that promises no relief from the cold. Today your thoughts turn to food, the sparse and hearty sustenance that carries you through winter's grip. Your stomach growls softly, a reminder that medieval peasants often faced days without enough to eat, especially when the harvest had failed or stores ran low. You pull on your woolen layers and step outside to the small garden plot behind your home. Snow crunches underfoot, and the few remaining root vegetables peek from frozen earth turnips, parsnips, and carrots, all dulled by frost but still edible. These were staples for peasants' tough plants that could survive winter and offer some nutrition when fresh greens were long gone. Inside, you start a modest stew in your iron cauldron, using dried legumes and salted pork from last season's preservation. The firelight flickers, casting golden hues on your rough wooden table, where a wooden bowl waits. You savor the warmth spreading through your hands as you stir the thickening broth. Food in the Middle Ages was far from gourmet. Peasants' diets were often monotonous and heavy on bread porridge and whatever root vegetables could be found or stored. Meat was a rarity often reserved for festivals or lucky hunts, though salted or smoked varieties might be saved for harsh seasons. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants regularly suffered from scurvy due to a lack of fresh produce, or if they managed to get enough nutrients through wild greens and preserved foods. You recall a curious medieval practice where some peasants ate black pudding, a sausage made from pig's blood, mixed with grains both for nutrition and warmth. It sounds unpleasant, but when hunger bites deep, you imagine you'd try anything. This is survival after all. As the stew simmers, you grind a handful of wild herbs to add flavor, their pungent aroma cutting through the winter air. You remember how herbs weren't just culinary. Many were medicinal, believed to ward off illnesses or lift spirits, though scholars debate how effective these remedies truly were versus placebo. Outside, a thin layer of frost that clings to the trees and the wind whispers through the barren branches. You eat slowly, mindful of every bite, knowing that a good meal is a rare gift in these long months. Each mouthful feels like fuel for the body and a balm for the soul. Later, you bundle up and set out with a small wicker basket to gather firewood, the scent of pine sharp and invigorating. The cold sharpens your senses. You notice animal tracks in the snow, silent signs of life in an otherwise frozen world. Medieval peasants knew the forest well, its dangers and its gifts, but you wonder how many times they risked encounters with wolves or worse just for a few more sticks. You return home, the basket full, and your body tired but warm from exertion. The day fades slowly into a cold dusk, and you settle again by the fire, grateful for the simple comforts of food, heat, and shelter. These small acts, repeated day after day, are the true stories of survival in the coldest nights. The night falls heavy and still, wrapping you in the familiar shroud of winter's deepest cold. You sit close to the hearth, its amber glow the only defiant flame against the creeping dark. Outside, the wind carries a mournful song through the bare branches, a reminder that this world is as harsh as it is beautiful. Tonight, your mind drifts to the ancient rhythms that have guided peasants through centuries of long, frozen nights. The small rituals, the quiet endurance, the hope flickering beneath layers of frost and hardship. You wrap your threadbare cloak tighter, feeling the coarse wool scratch your skin, but also knowing it is a shield. The humble garments of your ancestors were woven with care, dyed in indigo russet, and ochre colors drawn from the earth and soot, telling stories with each thread. The smell of smoke, leather, and wood fills the room, grounding you in a world both fragile and resilient. In these moments, you think about the community gathered under the same night sky, the whispered prayers said for warmth, for safety, for the coming spring. You recall how peasants believed in the power of small charms, knotted cords, sprigs of holly, and the ever-present garlic hanging near the door, to ward off not just illness, but the chill of loneliness and fear. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were mere superstition or an early form of psychological comfort that kept spirits alive through the darkest hours. Outside, frost etches delicate patterns on the window pane, like nature's own illuminated manuscript shimmering in the firelight. You breathe out slowly, watching your breath mingle with the warmth of the room, a fleeting ghost of life in the cold. As your eyelids grow heavy, you feel the steady heartbeat of the earth beneath the snow, the silent promise of renewal. You are part of this cycle, a thread woven into the vast tapestry of history, bound by endurance, by hope, and by the simple act of surviving the coldest nights. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sleep gently, knowing you are carrying forward the legacy of countless souls who face the cold with nothing but grit and quiet courage.